Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Rocket Revenue Podcast, where we open source building a predictable and repeatable revenue stream. And we talk about the things we kind of tweak and pivot and also just straight up make mistakes about. And then we say, hey, here's how we fixed it. And we share that knowledge with you guys. We hope it's valuable. In today's episode, we're actually going to talk about predictable, repeatable revenue and barter. Did you hear it's dead? Did you hear it died?
Yeah, there's rumblings on LinkedIn that the predictable revenue model, which is a pretty simple thing, right? It's being able to predict the revenue you'll bring in based on what you're doing is essentially what that is. Yeah, it's dead now, so no one knows what they're doing, and they never will ever again.
I can't believe it died.
Yeah,
It was so good and it's dead. So that's the whole episode. Thanks for listening. Nah, I'm kidding.
yeah, what a shame.
So, so do you think that they're talking more about, obviously what we're talking about is we've seen on LinkedIn the influencers of the world talk about how certain aspects of predictable revenue model, which would be like the SDR, AE, cold calling, cold email, that type of thing, it's all dead because it doesn't work anymore. So you're beating a dead horse. Barter, do you have any opinions on this topic?
So I was thinking there's a few different opinions that I have on it. And I'm writing it down because I will get long-winded and I'll forget very quickly. But the first one is, and I think we've talked about this before, but it may have been on this one because this is a redo. The audio didn't work the first time. But
Oops.
yeah, Pareto principle. Right. So 20% of your people give you 80% of your results. 20% of the things that you're doing throughout the day end up giving you 80% of your results. This is essentially a law, like when it comes to really anything that you're doing, and it generally works all the time. So when I look at what influencers are doing, what most of them are doing, most of them, and a lot of the times they're better marketers than they are salespeople. And a lot of the times, like they don't even realize that they're doing this, but people will follow the path that is either the least resistance or the most engagement. So think about it like that. So you think, all right, how does the Pareto principle apply to being a sales influencer on LinkedIn? All right. Well, like I just said, 20% of your people will give you 80% of your results. So the flip side of that is that 80% of the people that are in sales only bring in 20% of the results. And if that's the case, 80% of people are failing, especially compared to that 20% that are actually the A players that are bringing in the results. And you could say, oh, we got to fix that. We got to change that. Man, I've worked at a lot of places and it's the same every time. You will
Yeah.
have A plus 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 players and you'll have some that are below. And generally it's 20% brings in your 80%. So when you're creating content, which piece of the pie would you like if your end goal is to get the most engagement possible, the most followers possible? You want to broaden out your ICP if you're trying to sell a course or something like that. Well, you wouldn't want 20% of the audience, you'd want 80%.
Yep.
So, the 80%, what are they more likely to be interested in consuming? Are they interested in consuming, hey, we're only interested in being A players. If not, you're losing. You need to be more accountable to yourself. You need to work harder. You need to figure out a different way, or you need to figure out the fact that the other way is working and you're not working the plan. You haven't exhausted how to get good at what already works. Or does it make more sense to be like, oh, that thing that you're trying to do that you're failing at, you're objectively failing at because 80% are failing, it doesn't work anymore. And that's why. That's why and so which one is going to get
It's
more
not
engagement?
you, it's the model, and we have a new thing. That one's dead.
Yep.
That's what it is. And that's, I could go on and go on a tangent on like influencers in general of there's a lot of people. There are a few who have actually done it and then shared how they did it. There are
Yep.
a few who are sharing how they do it as they do it. Alex Hormozzi, right? He's just documenting as he builds it,
Yep.
and he's done some things, but he's documented along the way. And then the rest, and it's the Pareto principle there too. It's everywhere. The rest have never done it and will tell you how to do it to get clicks and to get views. And so the latest trend is that it's dead. Would you say, Barter? I'm going to mostly just tee you up in this episode. Would you say that it's dead because their results are going down, or it's more that they just have to have something new to feed their base, right? To feed them.
Yeah, and I mean another part of it is I wrote this down. Kind of come off a little odd maybe nowadays, but I've used this analogy for God probably the past 20 years. John Gruden. He was the coach of the Bucks back in the day, right? And we he came in, and the first time we won the Super Bowl, right? Won the Super
2000.
Bowl, and I say we because I know there's a Patriots jersey behind me, but I'm from Massachusetts, but I grew up in Tampa as well, so I work both sides. I have an NFC and an AFC team. Pat's first, Buck second. So we won a Super Bowl the first year with Gruden, but Gruden won the Super Bowl against the Raiders, and he was the Raiders coach the year before. So he kind of won with Tony Dungy's team, and he had the playbook to the team that we were playing against in the Super Bowl, right? So it's kind of interesting the way that that worked out.
Yeah.
But Gruden, kind of every year after that, and we won a quarterback that year was Brad Johnson, which, like, who the hell knows who Brad Johnson is, right?
13, Brad
Yeah.
Johnson.
He is the man. He's a G. But he wasn't like, I mean, he's not Brady, he's not Patrick Mahomes. He's a serviceable quarterback, right? Who had a good year and was on a good team. But every year after that, Gruden would say, well, the reason why we're not doing well is we need a new quarterback. And we went through a laundry list of quarterbacks over and over again. I mean, there's a list of different names of different people that were tried out over the next half decade after they won. And eventually it's like, maybe it's not the quarterback and maybe it's the guy that keeps saying that we need to do something new, and maybe you're kind of passing the buck by saying that this isn't working anymore, we need to try something new. Well, leadership in sales generally does this as well if they're failing. It's rare that a leader will be accountable and say the reason why we're failing is because I messed up on how we executed on this, or I messed up on how I interpreted the strategy and how I went to the market with that strategy. It usually is, this doesn't work anymore. We're going to try something new, because what does that do? What do you need? What do you need if you're trying something new? Well, you need time. And
Yeah.
what are they doing really? They're buying time. They're buying the ability to stay in that role for a little bit longer. This doesn't work anymore. We need to try something new. So we're going to go through this, but by the way, Gabe, we need to try something new. This isn't working anymore, and it's going to take at least 6 months for us to really figure out whether or not that's working. And if it doesn't work, no big deal. I'll tell you what the new thing is that I found, and we'll punt the ball down. And then that's probably why the average VP of sales averages less than a year and a half at a company. I think it's definitely 2 years tops is the average. And it's like, well, why is that? Well, I've worked with a lot of VPs of sales, and generally what they do is they take whatever play they learned somewhere else, whether it fits or whether it doesn't, and they probably didn't come up with it. They probably was there before they ever got there, and they bring it to the new place. And I could give you name after name after name, even at the CRO level, where they come in and they say, oh, we're doing challenger sale now. We're buying this. We're going to do challenger sale. We're going to roll this out. And they're not going to really follow up on it. They're not going to help teach it. They're not going to ensure that it gets learned. And if it doesn't work, they're out. And hopefully they last over a year where part of their stock vests. And then they're out, and then they go to the next one, and they're snake oil salesmen who have one play and they try to run it over and over and over again. And if that doesn't work, they'll just pass the buck and they'll say, well, that strategy didn't work here. Here's why it didn't work and why it's not my fault. We need to try a new one. And it's not like a culture. It's like an epidemic that's been that way for well over a decade, probably since there's ever been sales managers,
Yeah.
that they usually get in the role because of who they know a lot of the time. It's a lot of politicking. It's whether or not the owner likes them or anything like that, but they're never really accountable to themselves. They're usually complaining about the reps. They're usually complaining about the product. They're complaining about the prospect. They're not complaining about the fact that, they messed up. They could have been doing more. And again, that's content that sales leaders want to take and they want to use, and it helps them. When you say, hey, predictable revenue doesn't work anymore, and the director of sales or the VP of sales who just, did 50% of their target last year says, oh shit, I'm going to send this right over to my boss and say, look what this guy says. He says
Yeah,
it's
we
not
need more time.
working anymore. But what is predictable revenue? It's pretty simple. Like, I have a rep, and I know that if this rep makes 100 calls, he's going to connect with 20% of people on average. And you can check up on it, and it'll fluctuate a little bit. Out of those 20 connections that he gets out of those 100 calls, he generally gets past the gatekeeper and has a meaningful conversation 70% of the time. And then if he has a meaningful conversation, he usually books a meeting 40% of the time. And then they show up to the meeting 50% of the time. And then they close this percent of the time. Here's our ICP. Here's the average deal size that we go after. Based on all of these factors that you have to continue to check up on, because they do fluctuate, we can predict what that rep will earn over the next quarter based on those factors. So to say that it's dead, first off, predictable revenue was never predictable forever. You have to keep looking at the stats because they change. Things fluctuate. There's things in the market that can fluctuate. There's things with the rep that might fluctuate, but you have to really be in there and know your process to know when things are fluctuating and when a conversion rate dips. And then you have to be able to get in there and know how to diagnose why it's dipped, how to change it, how to work it, how to maximize it. All of these factors are pretty difficult to manage, and you have to really know what you're doing and have been in the game for a good amount of time and really have a good gut for sales. And a lot of people don't. So it's a lot easier to just be like, man, this doesn't work. Now, you never really worked it. It's the same reason why your reps are saying cold calling doesn't work anymore. They never really worked hard at cold calling. They never got really good at pitching. They never got really good at listening and asking the right questions and being engaging and sounding like someone that they would want to talk to on the phone. It's the same concept, except it's moved up to sometimes even the C suite, but particularly like directors of sales, VPs of sales. That's generally what it is. And that's why people say that it's dead. That's why people buy into the fact that it's dead. And the reality is, everyone is just lying to themselves because it'll never die. You'll always be able to have predictable revenue if you can look at all of those factors, all of those conversion rates, and check up on them and know why they're dipping. These people aren't mechanics, they're car salesmen, right? So a
Oh,
car
that's
salesman
good. That's
doesn't
good.
know what's under the hood. I know this. I got my start in selling cars. That's how I got my start in sales. I couldn't really tell you the engine size or anything like that. I could give you like an overview of the vehicle, and I knew the hot buttons that would get somebody interested in buying it. But I couldn't really tell you really when the rubber meets the road, like towing capacities and all that stuff. I didn't do that. I didn't need to either. But a mechanic can go in there and be like, I know exactly what's wrong with this vehicle. They go beyond the surface level. They can pinpoint exactly what it is. They know how to fix it. They know what it's going to take to fix it. And if you're a mechanic, you could say, hey, could you accurately predict based on looking at this vehicle, probably how long it's going to last and, the fuel economy and everything like that? And a mechanic would probably be like, yeah, I could. It wouldn't be too tough because I know all of these things. You ask a salesperson that on like a used vehicle and they'd be like, I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. There's really no telling, is what they would eventually say.
Yeah.
And that's
So
what they're saying. There's no telling. Yes, there is. You just haven't done the work and you're not consistently doing the work to be able to work the model that works.
I have nothing to add. If you listen to the last 5 minutes of Troy Barter, you know that he is a mechanic and a car salesman. And a couple of points I wanted to pull out of that were accountability. Nobody wants to be accountable. One joke I'll make is that it's really actually serious, but it's a joke. Is that Troy Barter just painted himself in a corner if he's not going to be accountable because I'm the CEO, and if you ever come to me and say, "Hey, it's broken," now I'm going to be like, "Well, how much time do you need, Barter? I'm going to play this back."
Yep.
But you just kind of showed everyone or listened that people that are listening that if you know the numbers and the numbers change, you just have to stay ahead of that. And predictable, repeatable revenue, and we talk about it a lot on this podcast, but this is more of an episode to kind of rant or at least break down like the misnomers around it and cut through the noise. If you know the numbers, it's still predictable, even if it's predictably bad. And here's my take on it. Most of these people, I would say companies and the employees that worked at them are out of Silicon Valley. In 2020 through 2022, making money and raising money was easier than it's ever been. Everybody had a budget. Everybody would buy a tool. So the Pareto principle almost went out the window. There was articles about salespeople being replaced by AI and all of these things because it was just that easy to get somebody to buy. And it was predictable and repeatable. And there was SDRs, SDR1, SDR2, AE, like levels in these orgs. And they just continued to hire and overhire. It's harder to get revenue now. It's still predictable if you have the right cadence and if you ever had a system. A lot of them just never had a system. Now that's separate and different from influencers posting about it, but it's the same culture and it's kind of a feedback loop. You have the actual VP of sales who then takes an article from someone on LinkedIn and says, "See, this is dead," and they feed each other, and then they all just feel good about it, except for the companies that have to lay off 5,000 people. And mostly they laid off salespeople in 2022. It wasn't like they laid off operations or tech. They
Yep.
laid off all the salespeople. That's part of it. I think that the other side of it, from a CEO perspective or a founder perspective, is if you just have one channel and it's working and then you just get comfortable with it, of course that channel will fluctuate with market conditions, with people and having turnover, with bringing new employees in, different product. But if you have multiple channels, you have affiliates, you have inbound, you have outbound, it's still always predictable and you can have some buffer to seasonality. So that's just lazy if you're only going to have one channel anyways. That's a whole separate episode of how many channels you should have and where to focus it, but I think that you kind of nailed it, Barter. I think there's nothing really more to add on like ranting about why it's actually not broken and why people think it is or will say it is. So, if you could, in a synopsis, Barter, say kind of what you said with like, if he makes 100 calls, 20
Yep.
answer. Like, I think that it's helpful to do that math for those that are sales reps out there. If you don't know your sales math, then you don't have predictable, repeatable revenue. You don't have the model down yet. And
Yep.
so, we'll just break down for me, Barter, in a couple of minutes or less, the process you go through to figure out the conversions. And like, maybe I'll ask you this too. Add in there the ROI calculator talk.
Yep.
Like that we've been using one and it's been killing. And it's just simple, but yeah, go for
So I'll speak to that because it is part of the predictable revenue thing in terms of an ROI calculator. Because there's if uh, people that have followed me on the tech sales side, particularly maybe director level and above, or if maybe some AEs where they've kind of heard this, they'll hear us say we're using an ROI calculator and we're killing it specifically because we started to do an ROI calculator. We've done it with two prospects and it blew both of them away. And they're both upper mid market level prospects. These were not SMB deals that we were
yeah,
working with either of them. But you say that to people that are in tech sales, and they'll be like, "What are you talking about? ROI calculators like don't work." Like people are sick of seeing them. They don't buy into them. And that's another great example of like, well, yeah, they do work. You don't know how to work them, number one. And number two, you're showing somebody an ROI calculator that's seen relatively the same type of ROI calculator from the last 15 companies that tried to sell them a product that's similar to yours. We're unique in the fact that we're selling technology into a field, shipping, where there's less technology and software being sold. There's only a couple of competitors. A lot of them haven't even thought to use them yet. It's a lot more like when I was at Fleetmatics in 2013 than it is at Verizon Connect in 2024, where it's all rip and replace. Everyone's seen it all before. People are jaded with everything. It's not the case. But ROI calculator, the easiest way of explaining why people are failing with an ROI calculator, and I can easily say this because I just said it to a prospect earlier today. I said it to the prospect, what my goal was when I was showing them the ROI calculator. It is not to show them the largest savings possible. That's never the goal. If your goal when you're showing an ROI calculator is to find the biggest number that you can and show it to them, you've already failed. Because the real goal of an ROI calculator is to show them a number that is savings. They are getting a return, but is the number that they believe no matter what happens, they're going to get at the very least. You need to leave with them feeling like you've wildly underpromised. And based on everything else that you showed in the demo, you're positioned to wildly over deliver for them based on the numbers that they see. And the numbers still don't look bad. So, an example would be we were showing somebody a 14-to-1 ROI and I knocked it down to 3-to-1. I was like, let's cut these things in half, and they were real. But I was like, my goal isn't to show you this insane number. My goal is to show you a number where, like, dude, no matter what happens, let's say if it was a year ago and we were like leveraging yellow quite a bit, right, to get to this, and it's like, all
it.
right, well, now we can't anymore. They don't exist. It would still produce the return regardless of almost any factor that could possibly happen.
Yeah.
And then he's like, oh man, that makes sense. And now when we give him that ROI calculator to bring over to their board where all they care about is dollars and cents, I will include in there, by the way, we started this high and think that that number is probably right, but we want to be as conservative as possible for you to underpromise and over deliver. And when you show that to a board and they're like, right, these are the numbers. Not only are they accurate, they're being wildly conservative about it. They're not trying to oversell us. There's no contract. there's I'm out of reasons to say no.
Hmm.
And if you don't do that, and your whole philosophy is, all right, let's show you an ROI calculator, 14 to 1, great, right? That no, they don't believe.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
haven't done what your job says.
What is that?
Sell.
Do the barter thing where like you pull out. What's that principle where like I do it on calls often, and you'll tell me after that I did it. Where it's like, if you were shipping XYZ, you may not be the right fit, but
It's
this is
indifference.
exactly what
Yeah.
indifference.
Which,
So
by the way, like, is
you
a
can use it
little
in
bit.
ROI.
Yeah, yeah, you're definitely leveraging indifference in the ROI for sure.
Yeah,
Also,
and
as we were talking
then
about earlier, when it comes to being accountable, it's effectively the same thing because I've learned this, that it's number one the right way to make sure that you actually hit the number for the company that you're working at, but number two, it is also a tactic. It is right now. I'm telling you, and you're my boss, right? Like it. But if you are actually honest and accountable, you actually get more leeway because they're more than likely to trust that you can fix it if you own up to the fact that you were the reason why it broke. But if
Yep.
you're just pointing the finger all the time and you don't have a plan, then they're more likely to be like, no, I'm looking for somebody that like the buck stops with them. I'm not
Yeah.
like so it, it's and it's real, but at the same time, it does work. It like because nobody wants to work with somebody that makes excuses. They want to work with the person that has the answer to the problem. So it's kind of a mix there. So one thing in terms of like wrapping things up, here's legitimate reasons why predictable revenue might fail for you if you're trying to work that model, right? So, four things. Number one, do you have the data? So, in other words, all of the steps to the sale, you need to have your steps to the sale, like we were kind of talking about calling, getting past the gatekeeper, getting a hold of the right person and pitching them, booking a meeting. How often do they show? How often do we accept them in the funnel once they show? And it turns out that they're qualified based on what the AE has, uncovered in discovery. We do the presentation. Do we get a verbal? Do we get a trial? Do we get them to buy? All of those things, and they all have different conversion rates and everything like that. How many do we have each month? What are the conversion rates for each person? Do you have all of that data? Do you have it all? If you don't have it all, then you can't do predictable revenue because it's all reliant on the data, right? So without the data, you can't predict. You're just guessing at that point. It's guessing revenue. It's not predictable revenue. Next is the data accurate, right? Just because you have the data doesn't mean that it's accurate. Even
Exactly.
dials, when we go from the where we use our dials over to HubSpot, the numbers are different. So I have to go into the dialer itself to get those numbers because I know that those are accurate. And I know for whatever reason, it's not translating over into our CRM. So it's not accurate in the CRM, but I have a way of making sure that it is. So
Yep.
for us, I know that the dials are accurate, but they're not accurate in the CRM. And you have to do that for every step. And I just laid out a lot of them, right? How do you make sure that all of that is accurate? Well, here's an example like qualified meetings. Well, if you're paying your rep for qualified meetings, then your qualified meeting number is not accurate. I can
Ever.
promise you that because they're going to put
It's
anything up that they
point blank.
possibly can. You
Never,
know,
ever, ever. And we have found that out. We're not just, that's not conjecture. We found that out.
100%. Yep. So, number one, do you have the data? Number two, is it accurate data? And you have to go the extra mile to ensure that all of that data is accurate. And you also have to this is why, you have to make sure that salespeople update the CRM and update their stages because if they don't, then you can't do predictable revenue. You can't predict if you don't have accurate data and it's not timely in terms of
Amen.
when things move. All right. Next thing is, are you constantly reviewing it? Are you constantly checking up on that data now that you have the so let's say yes to one and two. I've got the data. I've got all of it. It's accurate. I've double checked. I'm positive that this is accurate data. I've done all of the different things that could possibly be picked apart on there. Now you have to review that. Now that you have your baselines, you have your conversion rates, you have your time that it takes to go from one step in the funnel to the next step. All right, are you reviewing those things to see when they go up and down, to see whether they're going up and down with everybody, to find out
Yeah.
why?
Do
And the
you
next
know
question
how
is,
to
do you know how
optimize
to
it?
fix it?
Do
What
you
was that?
know? Yeah. As it changes, the accuracy changes. And then if you're not reviewing it, are you even optimizing it if you're not reviewing it?
Yep, and that's the final thing is do you know how to fix it now?
Oh,
Because
there.
if you don't know how to fix it at every one of those stages where it's like, man, I'm having trouble getting past the gatekeeper.
Yeah.
All right, well break that like let's role play it. Let's get and then like I'll get a pretty good idea just off of the role play what's going on and I'll
Mm.
probably know how to fix it for you. But I can't just tell you what to do. We ran into this with our team where they're like we had a question that they asked to qualify and they weren't comfortable saying it yet. not because they were afraid to, they just hadn't had any practice with it. So we role played it for a whole quarter. And now they do it every time. And now all of a sudden, when I tell them that we need to go up market, it's like nothing for them because now they know how to ask the questions that are important to ask when you go up market. But if I just told them on one call, hey, you're doing this wrong, you need to do this, and never checked up on it, never tried, never role played, never got my hands dirty, then it doesn't ever get fixed. And then I could say, well, predictable revenue doesn't work. No, I didn't work it. I didn't do everything in my power to fix the thing that I saw that was broken in our predictable revenue. Give you another example. One of the big things that was getting all of our deals stuck was the fact that things were just sitting out there on credit app. We send out a credit app or an onboarding document and it gets stuck. It's like, oh, we're okay. Well, here was our process before. Our process before was we're going to send you over the document. It's a PDF. I'm going to need them to print it out, sign it, scan it, and send it back. All right. So I've been in control of a budget for a good amount of the past decade that I've been in sales for the past, I've been in sales for 2 decades, been in control of a budget for probably the past decade for most of it. If you sent me one that was a PDF and said, what you need to do next is print it, sign it, scan it, and send it back, it's going to take at least a week longer than what it would have been if it was digitized. So
Yep.
you look at that and you're just like, all right, this is an easy fix. We went with Panadoc. I work with Panadoc. I love Panadoc, right? But we digitized it. We
Hashtag
got it
not
into our CRM, right? And then we send them out and they get back way faster. And also, it's how are you buttoning
very
that
small.
up?
It's
Hey,
like
here's the stuff that we need. Is this at your fingertips or is this something that you would need to loop somebody else in on? Oh, no, that's simple stuff. All right, cool. I'm going to send it to you right now. I'm going to walk you through it real quick. It'll only take a minute or two. Instead of just sending it out and hoping that they get it back. No, as soon as they get off the phone with you, they have 15 other things that are going to get tossed onto their plate. And then this is going to get kicked aside. And guarantee you they will forget about it within a half hour. So
God
we've
forbid
got
they
you
have to
now.
call
So
somebody else and then they didn't weren't even on the
exactly.
call.
Yep. So by design, we might do a call and it's a half-hour call, and I might make sure that it's a 20-minute call because now I know that I've got 10 minutes to walk them through the document if things go well. It's like, all right, cool. And I tell them that. I purposely made sure that this call was 30 minutes long so we could get this part done because I know that as soon as you get off this call, there's going to be 15 things that get tossed on your plate and it won't even be your fault, but this won't get done for weeks. So let's go through it now. And they never have a problem with it. They're like, yeah, you're right. We should get it done now. And I won't even have to think about it again.
It's
And it
not a
works.
contract, right? You just have
Yeah,
to decrease the friction to get it done and
exactly.
the amount of touch points. And
Yeah, it
just
doesn't make people mad. There's
heck,
no
we should add
need for
this in. This is just us spitballing here, but we should add this into that pitch. Like in freight, you don't want to have too many touch points because it leads to more damages and it leads
it.
to
Yep,
chaos. You don't
yep,
want to cross dock 100 times. Fewer touch points is better. Let's just get that credit app done now. We don't have to send it to Nancy. Let's just reduce the
yep.
touch points.
But those
So
are just two examples of where, like, all right, we identified places where it was stuck. The conversion rates became low at that stage of the funnel to the
mm,
next stage in the funnel. And the time that it took to go from one stage to the next was way longer than it needed to be. And time kills all deals. So we figured out what we needed to do we pulled levers that would have the highest positive impact with the least chance of there being any negative impact on the
and then
funnel.
at the end of the day, once you've done all of that, you can call it predictable, repeatable revenue, even if you still suck. That's
Yep.
how, like, if the company conversion ratios are 1%, at least you know it's 1% and you know that you need to go to product and make it better, or you need to do more dials. And like, I think a lot of the selling side is like, well, just do more dials. I'm obviously on the product side as well. Like, is our
Yep.
product not very good because our conversion ratios are low? Is there something, is our contract too like unsignable? Like, is it too much? Do we need to make that simpler? But you can never do any of those things if you don't do the first three steps of your 4 points.
Yep.
The fourth is how do you fix it? If you don't know how to, if you don't have any of it, if you don't have the data and it's not accurate, and you don't continually review it, then you can't fix it. And there you go. That is how you create predictable, repeatable revenue. And at Rocket Revenue, we talk about open sourcing that for Rocket Shipping. Hopefully, you found value in this episode. Troy Butter has some opinions. We happen to agree on this topic, and it's just fun to rant and rave about people who are not accountable to revenue, even though they should be using tactics to buy time and saying predictable revenue is dead. It most certainly is not. There's just a better way to do it, and you have to actually work hard. So there it is, guys. I hope you tuned in. If you loved this episode, share it. We don't have any sponsors. We never will. We're not trying to monetize this. We're trying to get the message out about, open sourcing revenue and, sharing ideas and creating that type of atmosphere in our little community on YouTube, LinkedIn, TikTok, wherever you can find this. So I appreciate it. Have a great day, and we'll see you on the next episode.